That's what it's all about, right? That's why we're here. To give it up and give it all. All right. My name's Anna, and I'm a princess of the Most High God. I didn't used to think that. Now I know it in my knower. Deep in my knower. And I used to struggle with methamphetamine, alcohol, men, lying, stealing, criminal behavior. You name it, I probably tried to dabble in it once or twice. But we're not going to glorify the enemy right now. We're going to share what God has done. And He's amazing. Amen. He's so amazing. I was born in a very lost, abusive family. By the time I was 2 years old, I was put in state's custody because my stepmom abused me and my dad just let her do it. I moved around many times in many homes, which were all abusive except for one. I found out when I was 40 years old that I had one good family when I was growing up. And I had a foster sister. After I came back to the Lord and got clean, she mailed me pictures of me and my brother when we were little, and we were happy. I have evidence that Jimmy loves me. He was kissing me. Don't ever let him tell you any different. He loved me once. Okay? He still does. All right. Okay. I was adopted when I was 7 years old by a Catholic family, which was a good Catholic family, and they did the best that they could with some broken kids. They didn't know how to take care of kids that were broken. They knew how to raise healthy, good children. And nobody taught her how to do it, and she did the best she could. But her son molested me. And because I was the girl in the family, because I was the only girl, I had to be the devil because I was a girl. And all the boys were perfect, but they weren't. It's all good, though, because we got a big God, and He taught me how to forgive Him. All right. Anyway, after all of that, and she found out what happened, she sent me to Crittenton and then off to multiple group homes. When I was 16, I met a family who were Christian, and they fought the state and got me out of group home. Even though I told the judge, there's no way you're ever doing that to me again. I don't want no more of your families, and I told him what he could do with his families, and he had another idea.
All right.
Darn the luck when you don't get your way, right? All right. But it was an amazing family, and I used to sit back, and they were like a white picket fence. I didn't feel like I belonged there because I didn't think that I was worthy enough for a family that moms loved their children and children loved and trusted their mother. So, of course, I self-sabotaged that one. And then right after that, I went back to juvie, and I had an amazing juvenile officer who empowered me to get some power back in my life and allowed me to divorce that family that just turned their back on me. And I took him to court. I called Judy, and I asked her if she wanted to be my mom, and she said no, and I said, I'll see you in court. I felt like the most powerful child on earth that day. And I took him to court, and I took my dad's name back. That's why me and Jimmy have different last names. And another family took me in. One of the teachers from my high school took me in so I could graduate from high school, and I was off and running. As soon as I graduated from high school, I had no one to tell me what to do, and no one anymore, and I started drinking. I started smoking weed when I was 11, but I didn't do it ongoing. You know, I behaved while I was in families, you know, because I didn't want them to get rid of me. So I started drinking really bad and tried to go to college, but my drinking got in the way. But right before I went to college, I met my real parents. And my mom was real happy to see me and was at the high school graduation. And after a while, I met my dad, but I struggled with him. Because when I met my dad, I did not want to hug him. I wanted to punch him in his face. Because I thought he was a punk. And anybody who did that, and I still hadn't had no healing yet. But I sat back and I knew that I needed a family, so I accepted everything that he did. That's that little codependency there, when we accept things that are not good for us. I began drinking more and more, and I got married to a man I met in a bar. I left him very quickly. Didn't take long to figure out that was a mistake. I think I really married him because my dad told me not to. And I didn't think he had the right to tell me how to live my life. I should have listened to him. All right. After I left my husband, I started doing meth, and I dropped alcohol like a bad habit, and I found my new friend. He was really my enemy. But at the time of my life, I thought it was my friend. A few years later, I met my son's dad, and I thought my life was finally perfect. He was the first of many men that was abusive, but he protected me. And since he protected me from everyone else, I thought that it was okay for what he did to me, and that's wrong. And I know a lot of women do that. It's like, oh, well, it's okay if they treat me like this. I'll put up with this because look at all these other things he does for me. And that's not what God called us to do. That is not how God called women to be treated, and not how men were called to treat. I didn't care about myself enough to leave Corey. But I loved my son, and I didn't want him to grow up to be like his father. So I left, and I took off and went to California to have a fresh start and to go as far as I could without falling in the ocean to get away from him, because I knew that I wouldn't stay away from him. I had a Corey disease, and I just couldn't get away from him, and he was bad for me. So I went as far away as I could, and I went to California. About a year later, I came home to pick up my son because I let him come back to visit his dad. And when I came back, I was pretty strung out. My son wasn't with me, and I did like 2 ounces of dope in a weekend to my head. I don't even know how I survived out of that. I do. It's God. So he put my son in the system, and I fought the state and got him back. And 6 months I got him back. His dad had dropped him off at his girlfriend's house and left him there for 4 months, and I knew the system and I knew how to get around it. And I told him, my front porch, my son, tomorrow morning, or I'm calling my lawyer. I had my son the next morning. While my son was in the system, my friend Jessica Miller took me to church, and when I walked in the church, now keep in mind, I was raised Catholic, and then I went to a Baptist church. I knew God. I didn't know him, but I knew of him. So I walk into this church, and I told God, right here, right now, you better talk to me, or I'm done with you. Never talking to you again. Me and you were done if you don't speak to me. God showed up through a precious woman of God who told me God was sorry, and when she hugged me, I felt all of heaven baptize me with his love for me. I wasn't completely changed yet. Remember, I've been bouncing around home to home to home. My concept of love and what God was trying to show me were two totally different things. But I knew that he loved me, and I knew that Jesus died on that cross for me. Trying to get the rest of me to figure that out took a little bit of time, and God had to do a lot of work. After I went back to California, I ran. I was afraid Corey was after me again. This time he wasn't going to let me go, and I couldn't live like that any longer. Back in Cali, I relapsed because I went around all my old friends. I got out from underneath my covering at my church, Got around my old friends, and I thought I'm going to get you all saved. I know this Jesus now, and they got me lost. And I fell hard. And a year later, I asked my friend to wake me up. If my son got up before me, or to watch him until I got up. She's like, no problem, dude, no problem. No big deal. Something in my spirit said I better lay down with my son right then and right there, and if I didn't, I would never see him again. My brother woke me up a few hours later saying they couldn't find my son. I began to look for him, and finally I jumped the wall of my neighbor's house. And as I was jumping over, I felt angel wings wrap me up, and they never let me go. Caleb was lying next to my neighbor's pool, dead as a doornail. As I began to revive him, he threw up medication later that I learned that my friends gave him Valium, and they thought he was dead. So instead of calling an ambulance or waking me up, they dumped him in the neighbor's pool like tweakers do. One cover-up after another. After Caleb died, I went right off the deep end and started going to jail. Eventually ended up in prison. God saved me every time. He took me to jail to save my life, because I got to jail and knew that if I didn't grab a hold of him, I was doomed. He saved me more and more every time, and I don't care. You can call it jailhouse religion, you can call it whatever you want, but when you walk in those doors and God does something, doesn't mean he's changed everything, but he changed something. And every time I went through those doors, I taught Bible studies, because I was the only one in there who knew the Word of God. God's going to use anybody. He'll use anybody who's willing and available. And if you're not available, he'll spit you out like Jonah. Because when I didn't get it right, I go back to jail and we're going to do this again. Now, I went after the people that went to kill my son. I went after them, and I was angry. And I began to kick their front doors in, and I was taking names. And there were 12 people in my house. I didn't even know who they were, because it wasn't my house. And I began to kick in doors. I was going to kill them all. And I had every intention on killing them all. And I got like this far to kick the front door in and woo, going back to jail. I said, fine, God, I can't kill him. I got you. While I was in prison, I went to church. I read my word. I'm on my face. And I get to church, and this little bitty old lady, I think she was like 80 years old, the most beautiful person I'd ever seen in my life. And that was something, because I thought women were ugly and no good. And she's in this church, and I'm sitting way off in the corner, because, I ain't like all them other people. I'm in Cali, for crying out loud. I'm a little Missouri girl in Cali. I'm not sitting next to you. I'm not affiliated. So I'm sitting over here all by myself thinking, oh, I'm over here. She ain't going to see me. A woman pointed dead at me and said, you're a princess of the Most High God. I laughed at her. I said, I'm not even a lady. What do you mean, princess? But those words radiated inside me. I had no idea that she just gave me a new identity. The world gave me an identity. The people that I lived with and the people I grew up around and all the people who had abused me gave me a false identity, but God that day gave me a new name. I got out of prison, and my little brother Jimmy called me. He was making his amends, and he said he was sorry because he left me out there in California all by myself. Told me he was living for Jesus and he was going to celebrate recovery and he'd be clean for 4 years. And I cried and I cried. And I remembered, I got off the phone and I hit my knees. And God reminded me of all that time that I was on my face when he saved me all that time ago, when he baptized me in his love. I knew it was time to go home. And I was in a crazy abusive relationship, and I tried to get clean many times, but the harder I tried, the more the enemy would have people show up to get me high. And not just a little bit. They would show up with an ounce of dope. I'm like, what are you going to do with that? So I would try and shut the doors off. They'd break into my house to bring me dope. That is so Satan. There's no way around that. So I knew if I was going to make it back to God and get away from the abuse and get away from the drugs, I had to go home. And I came home and my brother helped me and he took me to CR and he took me to church. And I left him crazy. I went to Kansas with this guy who had been beating me half to death in California. I took off and went to Kansas with him. And he did it again. This time, he did it in front of 5 cops. There were all the people that lived around the place where I was, were all police officers. And I'm in the backyard in the truck, and they all called the police. They all saw what had happened, and there was no way I was leaving Kansas with that man. They took him to jail, and they put me in a hotel and told me to call my family and tell them to come and get me. They were holding him in county until I got free. That never happened to me before. Any other time, that would have been a whole nother, I would have went to jail and they would have went free, because that happened quite a few times too. And my uncle, he came and he rescued me. My family never helped me any other time until that day he came, and that was God. I've been home now for 5.5 years, and I'm still clean. And when I got home, I told God I would do whatever he asked me to do if he just changed me. Because I knew that all the stuff that had happened in my life, it wasn't all their fault, it was my fault. I kept putting myself in those situations, and I kept using, and I kept falling on my face. All I needed was Jesus, and I knew that day. I said, God, if you don't change me, we're done. How funny I do that again. I'm not getting off the floor until you changed my life. And when I got up, he began to change me. I started working steps, and I was at church every opportunity, and I began to forgive the people in my life, and my life began to get better. It's amazing how that little bitty commandment, it's a command to forgive. It's not a question. It's a command. And I called my stepmom, who I hated all my life, to forgive her, and I really wanted God to save her. But after I forgave her, her husband died. God told me to go sit with her. I'm like, I really still don't like her. What do you mean go sit with her? I said I'd forgive her. I didn't say I was going to go hang out. She just kept looking at me. Why? Why you? And keep in mind, not even less than a year before this, I threatened everything in her life. Told her I'd kill her if she ever touched any kid in my family ever again. And it slammed her up against the wall. She was scared to death of me. I'm the one who forgave her. And it rocked her. She still asks me every so often. I see her and my sister. She's not my mom. She's their mom. And she asked me why, and I said, because Jesus loves you more than I do. I still don't like her, but I love her. There's not one place in the Bible that says we gotta like anybody. It says we gotta love them. It doesn't mean you gotta hang out with them. Doesn't mean I gotta go have a party with her. But I'm free of the pain. And I can pray for her. So I began to surrender more and more of the pain. And God met me where I was. He didn't say you have to come up to here. He met me exactly where I was, and he took care of me right where I was, and then he brought me up to here. A few years went by, and God called me to serve at the embassy, and I argued about running a house for women, of course, because I didn't like women. I might have been one, but I didn't like women. They were scandalous, they were no good, they were backstabbing. At least the ones that I knew. It's because I wasn't hanging out with the right women.
Amen, right. That's it.
So then, God brought me to CR and had me start ministering to women, and He changed my heart. Since then, I've been honored to give up my life for God, to share the message of the cross with women, and then God has been so faithful. And He's changed me so much, and as we begin to allow Him to change me, it all began with an identity change. That identity change. When she called me the princess of the Most High God, it changed my identity. I wasn't a liar. I wasn't a thief. I wasn't a counterfeiter. Because that's what the cops like to call me. Told me I was the worst criminal they ever had. Said I was right next to a pedophile. That wasn't nice of them to say to me. But God said I was a princess. And then my identity was in being a mom. My identity was being Corey's old lady. And I lost those too. My identity is being a princess of God. I am His daughter. Our identity must be in God and God alone. And what we do cannot validate us. Who we are as children of God and what we are is bought and paid for. I still have issues, but He loves me, and I'm still His princess. All right, in Jeremiah 29:11, He says, I know the plans and thoughts that I have towards you are for your good and to bring you, not for evil. I thought it was for evil, but it's for our good. And then Isaiah 27, I'm going to read it out of the Message Bible. I know it's a little different. In the beginning, He's talking about the enemy and what He's going to do to the enemy. And He says, at that time, God will unsheath His sword, and His merciless, massive, mighty sword, and He will punish the servant Leviathan as it flees. The servant Leviathan, crashing in flight, he'll kill that old dragon that lives in the sea. We all had a dragon, right? But at the same time, a fine vineyard will appear. That's us. That's something to sing about. He says, I tend it, and I keep it well watered, and I keep careful watch over it so no one can damage it. I'm not angry, I care. Even if it gives me thistles and thorn bushes, I'll just pull them out and burn them up. Let that vine cling to me for safety, and let it find a good and whole life with me. Let it hold on for a good and whole life.